Ladies and gentlemen, this defendant, Sheila Agee, did not physically pull the trigger on the gun that killed Brooklyn Sims. But this defendant's words were her weapon. Sharper than a knife, faster than a bullet. Her words, "If you don't come kill her, you a MF." That is what this mother, this defendant, said to her son. Her words were her weapon that assisted and aided and encouraged and incited her son to murder the mother of his child. And her actions were her weapon. She changed the whole path of this crime. She changed the whole direction of her homicidal son's mission to kill Brooklyn Sims. He was initially talking about killing her in Alabama, which is not okay. He wanted to shoot Brooklyn when they got back from Pensacola and got to Alabama and Citronelle. And what did this defendant do? She brought him to Pensacola and said, do it there instead. Ladies and gentlemen, she guided her son like a missile to its target. He had no idea where they were on August 11th, 2023, until his mother, his principal to this crime, directed him to that Home Depot on Davis Highway. But it's not only her words, and it's not only her actions, but it's her inactions. Her inactions were also her weapon that aided in killing Brooklyn Sims. Ladies and gentlemen, this defendant did nothing to save Brooklyn. She knew Keith was coming to Pensacola. He told her over and over again. She sent him the address. Come get her here. He said he was coming to kill Brooklyn over and over again, and she did nothing. He gave her a countdown. You have the text messages. He said, I'm on my way. I'm coming through Movico. I'm getting on the interstate. 45 minutes away. Stay out of my way. And she did nothing. She didn't call 911. She didn't get Brooklyn out of that store. She didn't get her out of harm's way. She didn't take her somewhere. Lock her in the back somewhere. Get her out of there. She did nothing. She didn't even put Brooklyn on notice, that Keith was threatening to come kill her. Now, she testified today and said that she did give Brooklyn information while they were at lunch. But you heard from the two young ladies that were on the aisle that day when Brooklyn got murdered. And they were asked how Brooklyn acted that day. And they said she was her normal, happy self. She wasn't concerned. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't worried. Because she had no idea that she was going to lose her life that day on aisle 52 in Home Depot. Because this defendant did nothing. At 11:28, this defendant, Sheila Agee, sent the text message to Keith for her to come do it in Pensacola. 26 seconds later, this defendant said, I'm on the way, send it. Keith Agee showed up less than 2 hours later and riddled Brooklyn Sims with bullet holes. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheila Agee set Brooklyn up to get murdered. She knew it was going to happen. She intended for it to happen. And it happened through her words, her actions, and her inactions. The text messages don't lie. I know that you have seen so many of them over the past couple of days, and I know you're probably tired of looking at them. But I want to put some up now that Sheila Agee has had a chance to put her self-serving spin on those text messages. At 11 o'clock, Keith says to Sheila, okay, I'll be waiting on y'all in Citro. At 11:06, Sheila says, but I'm not telling you not to be in Citronelle. That's up to you. Never dissuades him. Keith says, she ain't done none but cost me money and gave me a disease. I'm fittin' just shoot her. I hate that for Casey, but like I said, I can't take it. IDGAF, no more. Sheila responds at 11:09 and says, okay. At 11:10, Sheila sends Keith a text message and says, okay, I'll call you and tell you, MF, if you want to go to jail, I'll tell you when we get close. But if you don't come kill her, you a MF bitch. Sheila sends another text message at 11:23, assuring Keith that somebody will take care of his daughter. Keith sends a text message to Sheila at 11:24 and says, I'm just about to leave work, so I'll be off. Sheila responds at 11:24 and says, don't call Nanny and tell her she will try to talk you out of it. Sheila sends a text at 11:25, don't shoot at my MF car, I don't want to die. Sheila sends another text message, wait till I put her out. Keith sends a message at 11:26, says, because I'm open the door and just shoot her. Sheila responds and says, as long as you don't shoot me. Sheila sends another message at 11:28 and says, hell, this is where it becomes her idea on where to do it. Hell, if you getting off work now, I'll give you the address here. You can ride over here and do it so you don't have to do it in front of Casey. And then she says, we just in Pensacola. He says at 11:28, I'm OTW, send it. Sheila responds at 11:29 and says, hold up, let me get it. Erase the text because I don't want nobody to know I was texting you, stupid ass. At 11:32, Keith sends a message to Sheila and says, I'm coming through Movico, what's the address? 11:43, again, he asks her for the address. At 11:45, Sheila responds to Keith and says, which she'll probably end up committing suicide, talking about Casey, and she'll be with y'all anyway, meaning Brooklyn will be dead. Give me 10 men, I'm gonna give you the address, you ain't close yet. Keith sends a message at 11:48 and says, I'm on the interstate. At 11:55, Keith says, or asks, she gonna be on the floor, right? Then this defendant sends the exact location for the Home Depot on Davis Highway so that Keith knows where to go. And then he says at 11:56, he's 45 minutes away. She gives him a thumbs up, waiting on you. At 12:03, he sends a message to Sheila and says, I'm saying I'm going to have to find her in the back or some. Sheila responds and says, nope. Sheila sends a message at 12:06 and says, but just know I'll be the first MF you see, but I ain't even told her you were coming, so you good, but you going to see me for cussing me. She says at 12:06, no, I'm going to come out. She will be in. She won't know nothing. Keith at 12:10 sends Sheila a message and says, stay out my way. Sheila responds at 12:12 and says, I am. At 12:13, Keith says, you probably done called the police for that girl. Sheila responds and says, I swear to God, I ain't told her nothing about you. At 12:30, Keith says, yeah, you called the police. Sheila responds and says, okay, if you're trying to say I called the law on God, or excuse me, she says, okay, God, I ain't called nobody. She then says at 12:31, if I called the law or told her anything, I hope Kaya never take another breath. Remember, Kaya is her youngest child. Swearing on Kaya's life that she did not call the law or tell Brooklyn. At 12:38, Keith says, so that last thought of her knowing she effed and the regret in her face will be enough to satisfy me. IDGAF what she see when she dead. So a lot of time was spent, obviously, during the course of the state's case talking about Keith. And that's because, as Mr. Myers explained to you in his opening statement, the state first has to prove that there was a premeditated killing of Brooklyn Sims for us to then prove that this defendant, Sheila Agee, was a principal to that homicide. You've heard the facts and the evidence, so let's take a look at the law. And the judge is going to give you a set of instructions, and she's going to read it to you. To prove the crime of first-degree premeditated murder, the state must prove the following three elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Number one, Brooklyn Sims is dead. Number two, the death was caused by the criminal act of Sheila Agee or her accomplice, Keith Agee. There was a premeditated killing of Brooklyn Sims. Killing with premeditation is killing after consciously deciding to do so. The decision must be present in the mind at the time of the killing. The law does not fix the exact period of time that must pass between the formation of the premeditated intent to kill and the killing. The period of time must be long enough to allow for reflection. The premeditated intent to kill must be formed before the killing. So what is the evidence that you have? You heard from the DNA witness that Keith Agee's DNA is on the gun that was found on the side of the road near Home Depot. You heard from the firearms expert that the shell casings that were recovered in the Home Depot, as well as the projectiles that were recovered during Brooklyn's autopsy, were fired from that firearm that has Keith's DNA. You have the cell tower records that show Keith's movement, that show his movement from Alabama to Florida to Pensacola. You have the video surveillance from the Home Depot. You have the pictures of Keith when he was taken into custody, and then again when he was at the sheriff's office. And then again, you've got him at the Home Depot in a still shot to show ID. Keith Agee is the trigger man. The evidence that you have for premeditation is that this started 2 hours before the shooting actually occurred, before they, Keith and Sheila, killed Brooklyn. Keith Agee had to leave work in Alabama. He had to go get a gun. He had to drive for at least an hour and a half, if not longer. He gets to Florida. He parks in the parking spot next to his mother's truck. He goes into the store. He goes straight to aisle 52. He shot Brooklyn at least 7 times, and we say at least 7 times because 7 casings were found on that aisle. And then he left. He threw the gun out of the car. He ditched his vehicle. He waded through some water. He ended up at the movie theater on Bayou, and he was taken into custody. Ladies and gentlemen, based on the law and the evidence, that is first-degree premeditated murder. You are going to have some options of what are called lesser included offenses. And that's exactly what they are. They are lesser offenses of first-degree murder. The first lesser included offense of first-degree murder is second-degree murder. The judge will instruct you that to prove the crime of second-degree murder, the state must prove the following 3 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. 1, Brooklyn Sims is dead. 2, the death was caused by the criminal act of Sheila Agee or her accomplice, Keith Agee. And 3, that there was an unlawful killing of Brooklyn Sims by an act imminently dangerous to another and demonstrating a depraved mind without regard for human life. An act is imminently dangerous to another and demonstrating a depraved mind if it is an act or series of acts that, number 1, a person of ordinary judgment would know is reasonably certain to kill or do serious bodily injury to another, and 2, is done from an ill will, hatred, spite, or evil intent, and is of such a nature that the act itself indicates an indifference to human life. There is no intent to kill with second-degree murder. That's what separates it from first-degree murder. The next lesser offense that you will have is manslaughter. To prove the crime of manslaughter, the state has to prove that Brooklyn Sims is dead. Number 2, that Sheila Agee or her accomplice, Keith Agee, intentionally committed an act or act that caused the death of Brooklyn Sims. With manslaughter, there is no ill will, hatred, spite, or evil intent like there is required with second degree, and there is no intent to kill. And again, this is why this is a lesser, and these elements are not required for manslaughter. You're also going to see in your packet of definitions that there is a definition for culpable negligence with manslaughter. And once you read that instruction, you will see that it does not apply to the facts of this case. This honorable judge is also going to instruct you that a verdict of guilty should be for the highest offense which has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge is also going to instruct you on rules for deliberation. Your duty is to determine if the defendant has been proven guilty or not in accord with the law. It is the judge's job to determine a proper sentence if the defendant is found guilty. Your verdict must be based on the evidence and on the law contained in these instructions. Even if you don't like the law, you must follow it. Principles. Mr. Myers went over this with you in jury instruction, in jury selection on Monday. If the defendant helped another person commit a crime, the defendant is a principal and must be treated as if she had done all the things the other person did if the defendant intended the crime occur, and the defendant did some act or said something that was intended to and did incite, cause, encourage, assist, or advise the other person to actually commit the crime. To be a principal, the defendant does not have to be present when the crime is committed. Sheila Agee became a witness in this case. She testified before you. And it is up to you to decide her credibility. And one of the things that the judge is going to tell you that you should take into consideration is if the witness has some interest in how the case should be decided. Sheila Agee is on trial before you for being a principal to first-degree premeditated murder. She absolutely has an interest in the outcome of this case, and you should consider that in weighing her testimony before you. Keith Agee also became a witness in this case. And ladies and gentlemen, bless his heart, he is trying to save his mom. He has nothing to lose at this point. He's been convicted. He told you that there was nothing that would have stopped him that day. But ladies and gentlemen, this defendant not telling him where Brooklyn was would have stopped him. You have heard the shocking evidence in this case, horrific, as Ms. Agee described it, and you will be instructed on the law. And if you render a verdict in accordance with the law and the evidence, there can only be one just verdict in this case, and that is Sheila Agee is guilty of being a principal to the first-degree murder of Brooklyn Sims.